Every year, my son forgets my birthday. Not officially, of course. There's always a reason. His mother-in-law's birthday just happens to fall in the same week. There's always a trip, a family emergency, a poor Patricia who isn't feeling well. And every year I smile, pretend it's fine, and tell myself that mothers shouldn't expect too much. But this year, I stopped pretending. I didn't send a reminder, didn't bake my own cake, didn't leave hints like a fool waiting to be noticed. I just stayed quiet. And when they drove off for their little getaway, I called my real estate agent. By sunset, I'd bought a $3 million villa overlooking the water, paid in full, no discussion, no permission needed. Then I posted the photos online. Within hours, my phone exploded with calls. And for once, it wasn't about a forgotten birthday. It was about something they'd never seen coming. 5 years. Same cake, same kitchen, same woman lighting fewer candles every year. My name is Eleanor Hayes, 64 years old, widow, living in a quiet coastal town called Newport, Oregon. Once, this house was full of laughter. Birthday balloons, the smell of roast chicken, my husband humming off-key while decorating the cake. Now, the only sound is the matchstick scratching against the box. I light my own candles. I pour my own glass of wine. And I pretend it's just another day. But this year, I didn't even try to pretend. It started on my 60th birthday. Clara, my daughter-in-law, had promised they'd stop by after brunch with her mother, Vivian Cole. I set the table, baked my favorite lemon cake, even wore the red sweater my late husband loved. At 6 o'clock, Clara called. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Something came up. We'll celebrate soon, okay?" Soon never came. My 61st, I told myself, would be different. It wasn't. They sent a text, no call, no visit, just a digital greeting card that blinked "Happy Birthday, Eleanor," with fake confetti on the screen. I smiled at it for a full minute before closing it, pretending it didn't sting. By 62, they didn't even pretend to remember. A week later, I got a belated gift, a scented candle. No note. Just a return address printed by an online store. But the worst was 63. That year, I decided to surprise them. I drove an hour to their house with a small cake and a bottle of wine. I parked outside, rehearsing what I'd say. Something light like, "Thought I'd bring dessert." But as I walked toward the door, I saw them through the dining room window. Clara, my son David, and Vivian, all laughing around a perfectly set table, 3 plates, 3 wine glasses, a birthday banner hung across the wall that said, "Happy birthday, Mom?" Except that Mom wasn't me. It was Vivian. I stood there holding my cake box like a fool, while the woman who'd taken over my place in their lives blew out candles my son had lit. I didn't knock. I didn't cry. I just turned around, drove home, and threw the cake in the trash. That night, I realized something important. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded. It's easier to be angry at being forgotten. There's hope in that, a chance they might remember. But exclusion? That's permanent. That's being written out of the story altogether. Since then, I've stopped asking for attention. When Clara texts me, "Hope you're well," I reply with, "Always, dear." When David calls twice a month out of guilt, I tell him I'm busy with friends, the imaginary ones who never cancel plans. They think I've accepted it. They think I'm fading quietly, playing the harmless old widow who stays out of the way. But what they don't know is that silence has weight. It builds. It presses against the ribs until something cracks. And this year, when the familiar pattern started, again, the casual hints about Vivian's poor health, the suggestion that maybe we should celebrate later this month, I felt that crack open wide. So I smiled, nodded, and said, "Of course, dear. Go take care of your mother." They drove away that Friday afternoon, their car disappearing down my driveway. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt free, because I already knew what I was going to do. I was done waiting to be invited into their story. It was time to write my own. As the candlelight flickered against the kitchen window, I looked at my reflection. The lines, the gray hair, the faint smudge of lipstick. I didn't look pitiful. I looked like a woman about to do something unforgettable. I stopped reminding them, not to test if they'd remember, but to see if I still needed anyone to remember me at all. This year, I said nothing. I didn't drop hints about the date, didn't pretend to forget it myself just to make them feel better when they did. I wished them a good trip as they packed their suitcases, smiling as Clara reminded me that Mom hasn't been well lately, meaning her mother, Vivian Cole, the permanent guest of honor in my son's life. When their car disappeared down the slope, the snow on the front lawn was melting into thin, transparent puddles that caught the morning light. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling that strange mix of emptiness and relief that comes when you finally stop expecting anything from anyone. For the first time in years, there was no noise in the house, no waiting, no checking the clock, no glancing at the phone pretending I wasn't. Just silence, steady and clean. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the last flakes fall into the garden. Somewhere in that stillness, I felt something uncoil inside me, something that had been tight and tired for too long. I went to the drawer in the hallway where I keep old letters, things I haven't had the heart to throw away. Receipts from our first apartment, birthday cards from years when they still said, "Mom, we love you." And at the very bottom, a yellowed envelope with handwriting I knew instantly. Aunt Lydia Pearson. She'd passed 3 years ago, but the memory of her voice still lingered, dry, sharp, unyielding. She was the only woman in our family who'd never apologized for being difficult. Inside the envelope was a folded note in her handwriting, small and deliberate. If one day you find yourself asking permission to live, that's the day you're living wrong. I read it 3 times. The words burned in that quiet room like sunlight through glass. Asking permission to live, I'd been doing that for years without even noticing. Asking to be remembered, to be invited, to be included. Asking to exist in a story that no longer had a place for me. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me calm. Dangerously calm, like a lake after a storm. I poured another cup of tea and sat there until the sky turned from pale gray to gold. The idea didn't come as a spark or a flash. It arrived slowly, quietly, as if it had always been waiting for me to notice. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old contacts until I found the one I hadn't called in nearly a decade. Benjamin Carter, my late husband's lawyer, and one of the few people who'd ever treated me as an equal. My hands didn't even tremble as I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring, his voice exactly as I remembered. Steady, careful, the kind of tone used by people who expect bad news. "Eleanor," he said, "it's been a while." "Yes," I replied. "Too long." There was a pause, the kind that usually comes before condolences or confessions. I didn't give him the chance for either. "Ben," I said, "find me a house by the sea. Something with sunlight. Something that feels like freedom. Money isn't a problem." He hesitated, just a breath, no more. Then his voice softened. "You sound different." "I am," I said. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time with the phone still in my hand. The afternoon light filtered through the white curtains, laying soft patterns on the floor. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, my mind felt sharp, my heart steady. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't running away. I was simply reclaiming the air I'd been told to breathe quietly. The silence that morning wasn't loneliness anymore. It was the sound of a beginning, my own. When the door of the villa opened, what swept in wasn't just the sea breeze. It was freedom. The kind that doesn't come from escape, but from ownership. The kind you buy back after spending most of your life giving it away piece by piece. They called it Sea Haven Estate. A name so pretentious I should have laughed, but when I stepped inside, something inside me shifted. The house was all glass and quiet power. Spiral stairs that rose like a secret. Rooms filled with air and light instead of noise and apologies. The lavender garden outside had already started to bloom. Its scent faint but determined, like something reclaiming its place in the world. Jennifer, the agent, walked behind me, her heels soft against the floor. She kept explaining the layout, the market value, the expected appreciation, all those polite numbers that are supposed to make a woman feel responsible. I wasn't listening. I'd spent 64 years being responsible. The good wife, the dependable mother, the quiet widow. Now I wanted beauty, not justification. When she finally paused, waiting for my decision, I said it the way someone might say something inevitable. "I'll take it." She blinked. "Would you like to think it over? Maybe talk to your family?" My laughter surprised even me. My family doesn't consult me when they make their plans. Why should I? Jennifer's professional smile faltered just a little, as if she realized this was not just a purchase, but a declaration. She nodded, took out the papers, and watched as I signed my name with the steadiness of someone who had stopped seeking permission. $3.2 million. The number meant nothing, not compared to what it bought me. Not the marble floors, not the lavender garden, but silence on my own terms. It was Aunt Lydia's inheritance, the one no one knew about, the quiet fortune she'd left in trust with the words, "For when you finally decide to live." I transferred the funds the same afternoon. No hesitation, no second thoughts. When the deed arrived the next day, I ran my fingers over my name, Eleanor Hayes, sole owner, and felt a pulse of something I hadn't felt in decades: possession, not of property, but of self. That evening, I unpacked one suitcase, set a single plate on the kitchen counter, and poured a glass of red wine. I didn't cook, I didn't decorate. I simply existed, freely, quietly, completely. For dinner, I ordered takeout from a nearby restaurant that cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. I set the table for one, not because I was lonely, but because I finally understood that solitude could be sacred. When I lifted my phone to take a picture, it wasn't vanity. It was evidence. Proof that I was still here, that I had made something of my own, that I didn't need an audience to make it real, just the courage to post it. The photo was simple: a plate, a glass of wine, the reflection of a woman who looked both older and somehow new. I typed the caption carefully: "Birthday dinner at my new home. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones you give yourself." It went up on every platform I could still access, half of which I'd forgotten the passwords to until that night. I didn't expect a reaction. But within an hour, my phone started ringing, then buzzing, then screaming. 28 missed calls. David, Clara, and even Vivian Cole, the woman who'd somehow rewritten my son's loyalty without ever raising her voice. Their names flashed on the screen in rotation, each one more insistent than the last, as if the entire family had just discovered that the person they'd quietly erased had been writing her own story all along. I didn't pick up. I let the phone ring until the battery died. I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was quieter and far more dangerous. It was satisfaction, slow and deliberate, the kind that comes when the scales finally even out after years of imbalance. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the space that was now mine, not because someone gave it to me, not because anyone approved it, but because I claimed it. For years, I'd been told that women my age should simplify, should downsize, should be practical. Practical had kept me small. Practical had kept me forgotten. And now, practical could rot. The night grew darker, but I didn't turn on the lights. I wanted to feel the shape of the moment, the stillness that comes after choosing yourself. The hum of messages filled the room, texts, voicemails, all those urgent voices suddenly remembering that I existed. I didn't answer. Not because I was being cruel, but because I'd already spent enough of my life responding to everyone else's needs. I poured another glass of wine and raised it slightly toward the invisible crowd of people who'd once assumed they knew me. "To freedom," I whispered. Not the kind that comes from running away, but the kind you purchase back, the one that costs exactly $3.2 million and 64 years of silence. And as the night stretched quietly around me, I felt the first wave of something new. Not regret, not revenge, but a peace that came from finally belonging, not to anyone else, but to myself. The notifications began within minutes. One message, then another, and another, until my phone became a living thing vibrating with panic. "Mom, what's going on?" "Explain this right now. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." And then the inevitable one. "Did you just spend $3 million?" I didn't reply. For years, I had answered everything. The smallest questions, the constant check-ins disguised as concern, the suggestions about what was best for me. I'd explained my choices, justified my emotions, and softened my tone so no one would call me difficult. But this time, I didn't explain anything. I owed them nothing. As the phone kept flashing, I watched the messages pile up without touching it. Each new alert felt like a ghost of an old conversation, the kind where my voice had never truly been heard. I could almost hear their tone, the mixture of disbelief and judgment, the polite panic that comes from realizing the person you thought you could control has stopped asking for your permission. It was almost funny. They had spent years telling me I was fragile, unsteady, incapable of managing my own affairs. They had wrapped their control in kindness, their condescension in care, and now they didn't know what to do with the woman who refused to be managed. I thought about the phrase that had followed me all my life: "You're not thinking straight." They said it when I cried at my husband's funeral, when I refused to sell the house, when I talked about wanting to travel alone. It was the family's way of saying, be smaller, be quieter, be less of yourself. Now, apparently, I was still not thinking straight. Only this time, the accusation sounded more like fear than concern. I leaned back, letting the quiet stretch out around me. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It had weight, shape, meaning. I realized that silence, used properly, can be louder than any argument. Every missed call was a confession, proof that they needed my compliance to stay comfortable. I remembered every time David had smiled at me while checking my bank statements, just to make sure everything's fine. Every time Clara had suggested that maybe I should let the younger generation handle the complicated stuff. Every time they'd made decisions for me and I had let them, because it was easier than fighting. All those small concessions, all those moments of pretending not to notice how neatly they'd boxed me into the role of the dependent mother. They thought love meant control, and I had been too tired to correct them, until now. Tonight they were seeing what freedom looks like when you've spent decades being polite. It doesn't come with fireworks or revenge. It comes with calm refusal, the kind that terrifies people who've built their confidence on your compliance. My phone buzzed again, lighting up the room like a warning. David's name appeared over and over. Clara's followed, then Vivian's. Of course. The self-appointed queen of moral authority, reaching out from her throne to see if her kingdom had shifted. I could almost hear her saying, "This isn't like you, Eleanor." No, it wasn't like me. It was me, the version they had all worked so hard to bury under duty and gratitude. I imagined their conversation somewhere far away, David pacing, Clara panicking, Vivian advising. They would discuss my mental state, the irrational decision, the potential damage. Not once would any of them ask why I had done it, because the why would expose the truth they couldn't face, that I didn't need them anymore. The sound of the phone became background noise, a kind of static I could tune out. Every unanswered call built a wall between us, brick by brick. And the strange thing was, the higher it rose, the lighter I felt. Sometime past midnight, when the messages finally slowed, a new notification appeared. A text from Benjamin Carter. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes. The transfer cleared. Sea Haven Estate is officially yours." I stared at the words for a long moment before I started to laugh. The kind of laugh that comes not from humor, but from the sheer release of it all. The kind that shakes something loose inside you. My eyes burned and tears came before I even realized I was crying. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't joy either. It was relief, the physical proof that I still belonged to myself. For so long, I had measured my worth by how much I could give, how much I could endure, how well I could play the role they expected of me. I'd been mother, wife, caretaker, dependent, but never fully me. Now, for the first time in decades, I had something no one could question, manage, or explain away. A decision made entirely for myself. I thought about Benjamin's message again. "The house is yours." The words hit differently this time. The house wasn't just property. It was the first declaration of independence I'd ever signed in ink. I wiped my face, still smiling. Tomorrow they would come. They'd drive up with polite concern and carefully rehearsed words. They'd bring explanations, maybe even accusations disguised as love. But tonight all I felt was stillness. Not the kind that comes before a storm, but the kind that remains after one. When the air is finally clear and you realize the worst has already passed, they would come and they would demand answers. They'd want to know what had gotten into me. They'd tell me I wasn't myself. They'd say I was being reckless, irresponsible, unwell. But I knew the truth. For the first time in my life, I was entirely myself. And tomorrow, when they arrived with all their questions and their fear, I would be ready. Because I was no longer the woman who waited for permission. And I was no longer afraid. Tomorrow they'll come, but this time I won't be the one explaining. He arrived earlier than I expected, long before I'd finished pretending to enjoy the quiet. The knock was sharp, practiced, the kind of knock that belongs to someone who believes they have every right to enter. When I opened the door, David was standing there, his face drawn tight with a mixture of exhaustion and anger. He didn't say hello. He didn't even step inside at first. He just looked at me as though trying to locate the version of me he could still manage. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" he began, the words rushing out like steam from a kettle. "A purchase like this, it's insane. You can't just go off and buy a multi-million-dollar house without talking to anyone." I let the words hang in the air, slow and heavy, before answering. "Why not?" He blinked, clearly unprepared for resistance. "Because that's not how things work. You don't make financial decisions of this scale without consulting your family." "Consulting," I repeated softly, almost tasting the word. "You mean asking for permission?" "Mom, that's not what I said." "It's exactly what you meant." He finally stepped into the living room, still looking around like the house itself was part of my mistake. His eyes moved over the furniture, the high ceilings, the open space, searching for proof of recklessness. "You can't afford this," he said at last, his voice quieter now, more dangerous for it. "Dad's insurance was decent, but not this kind of money. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that I'm 64 years old and tired of being treated like a child." "That's not fair," he shot back. "I've only ever tried to protect you." "Protect me from what, David? From living? From making my own choices? From existing without your supervision?" His jaw tightened. "You don't understand. Scams target people your age. I just don't want to see you get hurt." I smiled then, but it wasn't kindness. If anyone's ever hurt me, it wasn't a stranger. He flinched slightly, the truth cutting closer than I intended. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice as if volume could soften arrogance. "Please, just be reasonable. You've always said family should make decisions together." "I said that when family acted like family," I replied, "not when they acted like auditors." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt stretched like a thread about to snap. Finally, he sighed, frustration spilling into his tone. "This isn't like you. Buying something this expensive, this impulsive. It's reckless. You're not thinking clearly." I almost laughed. "You sound exactly like your father. Do you remember how many times he used that phrase on me?" He looked caught off guard. "Dad just wanted what was best for you." "And so do you, I know. But what's best for me always seems to mean what's most convenient for you." His voice rose now, louder, sharper. "You can't keep making this about control. I'm trying to help. You could lose everything if you make the wrong move." I leaned forward, my tone steady, measured. "I already lost everything, David. The day I realized that my son trusted his mother-in-law more than his own mother, I lost whatever illusion of family I had left." He froze, eyes flicking up in confusion. I didn't stop. I'd waited too long to speak. "You think I don't notice how Claire's mother has become the center of every plan, every conversation, every holiday? Do you think I don't see that my place in this family has been slowly reassigned to someone else?" "That's not true." "It's completely true, and we both know it. But it's all right. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." He exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair. "You can't just shut everyone out like this. If you needed money, you could have asked. If you wanted to move, we could have helped you find something more appropriate." "I didn't need your help," I said simply. His voice cracked slightly. "So you just went behind my back? You just did this to prove something?" "Maybe," I said, my tone calm enough to unsettle him. "Or maybe I did it because I was tired of asking for permission to exist." He stared at me as if trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the version he'd built in his head. I watched it happen. The confusion, the disbelief, the flicker of guilt he tried to hide behind irritation. Finally, he muttered, "You're being ridiculous. There's no way you could afford this place. Unless—" I waited, giving him space to reach the conclusion he was too proud to say aloud. "Unless what?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "Unless someone gave you the money." "Yes," I said. "Someone did." "Who?" "Your Aunt Lydia." He frowned. "Aunt Lydia, she didn't have that kind of money." "She did. $7.3 million to be exact. All left to me." His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like someone who had just stepped into a room where gravity worked differently. "You're joking," he said, but his voice was thin, uncertain. "I'm not," I said. "And before you ask, no, not 1 cent of it was meant for you. Aunt Lydia believed that money should go to those who still remember how to stand on their own." His face changed then, the color draining slowly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have treated it like a problem to manage instead of a gift to live with." He didn't answer. He couldn't. I watched him struggle with the realization that his version of me, fragile, dependent, manageable, was gone. I said nothing more. There was nothing left to defend. I didn't need to prove anything. I'd already done it the moment I signed that deed. He stood there for a long time, staring at me across the dining table. The sunlight from the tall windows split the room in half, one side warm, one side cold, and for the first time I realized we were standing on different sides of more than just the room. "Mom," he said finally, his voice quieter, smaller, as if he was speaking to someone he no longer recognized. "I don't know who you are anymore." I met his eyes, steady and calm. "I've always been me, David. You're just seeing it for the first time." He didn't respond. He just nodded faintly, as though conceding a battle he hadn't realized he was fighting, and walked toward the door without another word. When the door closed behind him, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something else, the soft, trembling ache of freedom, the kind that costs everything but is worth more than anyone can measure. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain that either. 2 days passed before Benjamin called again. His voice was slower this time, deliberate, as if he had rehearsed every word and still didn't know how to begin. He said there was something strange in my financial records, something that didn't make sense. I thought he meant a simple clerical mistake, but then he said my name appeared on 3 separate loan contracts, totaling nearly $1 million. The world tilted, not violently, but in that quiet, disorienting way that makes your pulse forget its rhythm. "That's impossible," I told him. "I've never taken a loan in my life." He didn't argue. He only said, "I know. That's why I double-checked." The next morning, he came to the house with a folder under his arm, the kind lawyers carry when they already know the truth will hurt. Inside were copies of the contracts, each page stamped, notarized, and signed. My signature appeared at the bottom of all 3. He slid a magnified copy across the table. "Look at this, Eleanor. Tell me this isn't yours." The handwriting was neat, familiar, painfully close. The curve of the E, the narrow slant of the H. If I hadn't known better, I would have sworn I'd written it myself. The imitation wasn't perfect, just perfect enough. My stomach tightened as he explained that the loans had been taken out over the past 18 months, the funds transferred through accounts linked to my family trust. I didn't hear everything after that. The words fraud, liability, legal exposure blurred together until they sounded like static. I asked him who had access to the trust. He hesitated. Then he said softly, "David's signature appears as the guarantor." I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that my son, the same man who had scolded me for buying a house, had been quietly borrowing money in my name. I asked Benjamin to leave the documents with me. He nodded, his eyes full of that professional pity I despise, the kind that says you didn't deserve this, but you should have expected it. After he left, I called David. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the phone. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding tired, cautious, already defensive. "Mom, can we talk later? I've had a long day." "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We'll talk now." There was silence on the other end, the kind that stretches out when someone realizes the conversation won't go their way. "I just got off the phone with Benjamin," I said. "He found 3 loans, all under my name." "Care to explain?" He exhaled sharply. "I was going to tell you. It's not what you think." "Then what is it, David?" "It was an emergency. Clara's mother had medical bills piling up. Insurance didn't cover everything, and Vivian was too proud to ask for help. I signed your name to make things easier." My breath caught. "You forged my signature to give money to Vivian?" "I didn't forge it," he said quickly, his voice rising. "I just signed for you. It's the same thing, really. I thought you'd approve once you knew. You always said families should help each other." "Help?" I repeated the word slowly, tasting the betrayal in it. "You helped them with my name, my credit, my trust fund. You helped them take the one thing that still belonged entirely to me." "Mom, don't make this a big deal," he said. "I was just trying to do the right thing." "The right thing for whom?" He didn't answer. The silence that followed was the kind that bruises. I could hear his breath on the line, fast and shallow, the sound of guilt pretending to be fatigue. I realized then that he wasn't calling as my son. He was calling as someone caught. "You think because you meant well, it erases what you did," I said. "But good intentions don't rewrite signatures. They don't change the fact that you used me. Not my money. Me. You used my name like it was a tool." He tried again. "Clara was desperate. Her mother has 2 houses, a retirement account, and a husband who left her more than enough. Don't insult me by pretending this was about compassion. This was about control. It always is." He said my name softly, as if saying it might pull me back to the version of myself that would forgive him, but something in me had hardened, something that wouldn't bend again. "All my life," I said quietly, "I've listened to people tell me what I couldn't do. Couldn't handle the finances, couldn't live alone, couldn't make decisions without someone's approval. And now that I've proven I can, you're terrified that it's true. Mom, please. No, David, you don't get to please your way out of this. You took what wasn't yours because you thought I'd never notice, because you assumed I'd stay small enough to miss it. He was silent for a long time before finally whispering, I just wanted to help. The words were so small they barely made it through the phone. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. My voice came out even and low. You didn't help me. You helped them take from me what I spent a lifetime building. You helped erase me. Again. There was a click, the sound of him disconnecting before he could hear what I might say next. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling not from sadness but from anger so deep it felt clean. I had been humiliated before. I had been ignored, dismissed, forgotten. But this was different. This was theft, dressed as love. And the worst part wasn't that he'd done it. The worst part was how unsurprised I was to find out. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles like a saint and speaks with the voice of a mother who just wants everyone to get along. When Vivian Cole called to suggest we clear the air, I agreed. Though not out of curiosity, I wanted to see what guilt looks like when it thinks it can disguise itself as grace. She arrived at the cafe exactly on time, wrapped in beige, wearing that faint perfume she always chose, the kind that smells like sincerity. Her voice was soft, her words practiced. Eleanor, I wanted to thank you for being so generous. Clara told me how much you've done for us. She placed a trembling hand over mine as if gratitude had physical form. It's been such a hard year. I can't imagine how things would have gone if not for your kindness. You really saved us. I watched her mouth move, the corners lifted just enough to imply warmth, but her eyes stayed still. I had seen sympathy before. This was calculation. She talked about her illness in detail, about the endless treatments, the procedures, the mounting bills. She pulled out photographs, documents, charts, what she claimed were medical records, printed on crisp paper, folded carefully to look worn. She spoke with pauses, the kind that invite pity. You've always been such a compassionate woman, she said. You understand what it means to sacrifice for family. I let her speak. I let her build her story the way a spider spins its web. Delicate, deliberate, sure of its audience. I nodded when expected, murmured polite words, and waited until her voice softened to a near whisper. Then I said very evenly, Vivian, tell me something. When did your treatment begin exactly? She blinked. About 2 years ago. Why? And which hospital handled your case? Her lips parted slightly, as if surprised that anyone would ask for specifics. Houston Memorial, she said after a pause. I smiled, matching her tone. That's interesting. I just wanted to know because Benjamin has a few connections in the medical system. He's been helping me verify the loans under my name, the ones taken to pay for your bills. The air between us changed, not visibly, but in that subtle shift you feel when someone realizes the script has been taken away. Vivian leaned back slightly, still smiling but now too still, too careful. I think there's been some misunderstanding. I don't think so, I said. The records don't exist, Vivian. No hospital, no billing history, no diagnosis. But there are signatures, mine, copied almost perfectly, and all of them tied to your daughter's account. She didn't speak. Her eyes, those pale blue eyes that used to blink so kindly at family dinners, turned sharp. There was no confusion left in them, only assessment. Eleanor, she said finally, the tone stripped of pretense, I understand you're upset, but dragging this through lawyers will only hurt David. Surely you don't want that. And there it was, the threat dressed as motherly concern, the weapon hidden under velvet. Don't worry, I said, keeping my voice level. I won't hurt David. You already have. Her smile didn't falter, but her hand twitched slightly, betraying what her face refused to show. You don't want to do this? She said. People might start wondering what kind of mother turns on her own son. I'm not turning on my son, I said. I'm turning on the woman who taught him how to lie. That was the moment she finally looked away. Only for a second, but it was enough. Later that evening, I called Benjamin and told him everything. He listened in silence, taking notes, then said he'd have his team check the national records. Within 24 hours, he called back, his tone grim. There were no medical files, no insurance claims, no trace of treatment anywhere under Vivian Cole's name. He didn't stop there. He dug deeper, and what he found painted a story much darker than either of us expected. Vivian Cole had been indicted twice, once in Texas, once in Florida, for fraud, identity theft, and financial coercion. Both cases had been dismissed due to lack of witnesses, but the timeline spoke for itself. Each location matched the years before she met Clara's father. Each case involved elderly widows, each one convinced they were helping a kind woman through a crisis. When Benjamin told me this, I felt something inside me close quietly, like a door that had been left open too long. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply understood. Detective Naomi Blake was brought in soon after. Calm, methodical, the kind of woman who has learned to hear lies through politeness. She traced the flow of the money from the trust to 3 shell accounts. Every withdrawal matched the dates of David and Clara's so-called family vacations, the ones where I'd been told Vivian was too ill to travel. Naomi asked me if I wanted to press charges. I said I wanted the truth. She smiled slightly and said those two things often led to the same place. That night, Benjamin sent me the final report. Names, dates, connections. Vivian Cole, the woman who preached gratitude and humility, had left a trail of broken families behind her. Every one of them had called her an angel. Every one of them had been drained dry before they realized who she really was. I sat for a long time reading through the evidence, and at some point, my reflection appeared faintly on the glass of a framed photo nearby. For a moment, my face overlapped with hers on the printed report. 2 women, one genuine, one counterfeit. And in that distorted reflection, I understood the cruel symmetry of it all. She had built her life pretending to be good. I had spent mine trying to prove I was. The difference was simple. She needed to be believed. I just needed to stop caring if anyone did. Benjamin's voice had changed. It carried that careful tone reserved for conversations that would alter something permanently. He said he had everything, the emails, the bank records, the transaction logs, all pointing in one direction. He told me he'd send the files encrypted and that I should prepare myself before opening them. When I finally did, my hands trembled not from surprise, but from the confirmation of what I'd already begun to suspect. Every thread of deceit, every transfer, every falsified loan led back not to Vivian, but to the person standing closest to me all along. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had once believed was family. Her name appeared on the documents not as Clara Wynne, but as Sarah Cole. The same last name as Vivian's. The same signature, stylized and rehearsed. For years I had believed Clara was just naive, easily influenced, eager to please her manipulative mother. Now I knew the truth. There had never been a Clara Wynne. There had only ever been Vivian and Sarah, 2 women who had built their entire existence around deception. Benjamin walked me through the evidence piece by piece. He showed me the joint accounts under false IDs, the transfers masked as business reimbursements, the property records cross-referenced under aliases. He had even obtained a copy of a video from the bank's security camera, one that captured a woman withdrawing nearly $50,000 in cash using an authorization code tied to my trust. He paused the footage and looked at me. "You should see this for yourself," he said quietly. When I saw her face, there was no shock, only stillness. The woman in the recording wore sunglasses, her hair tied back, but even through the grainy resolution, I recognized her movements. The way she turned her wrist, the way she pressed her lips together before signing a receipt. I had seen those gestures across countless dinners, holidays, and quiet moments where I had believed we were family. It was Clara, or Sarah, rather, the daughter of the woman who had taught her that kindness was just another currency. For a long moment, I said nothing. Benjamin waited, patient and still. Finally, I spoke, and my voice didn't sound like my own. "My daughter-in-law," I said, each word deliberate, the one I hugged every Christmas morning, the one who kissed my cheek and called me Mom. She's the accomplice. Benjamin didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. I asked him how long he'd known. He admitted he had suspected for a week, but wanted to be certain before telling me. The pattern was too clean, too consistent to be coincidence. The withdrawals matched perfectly with the dates of their family trips. Every time I had been told Vivian was too sick to travel, the 2 of them had been flying across states, not to hospitals, but to banks. For years, they had built this scheme quietly, methodically, waiting for the right moment to drain the account. Completely. They had assumed I'd never question a charge, never ask for receipts, never understand the details. They had built their con on the foundation of my silence. Benjamin asked if I wanted to report them immediately. I told him no. I needed time to think. He frowned, confused. "Eleanor, they've committed a felony. We can have them arrested before they know what's happening." But I had already decided. "Not yet. I said. Let them think I'm still naive. Let them believe I'm still the woman who trusts every word they say. He hesitated, then nodded slowly, realizing what I intended. The truth didn't shatter me. It refined me. It burned away the last trace of the woman who still hoped for apology or understanding. What replaced her was colder, clearer, made of the same steel that comes from surviving humiliation one too many times. I began to think in steps rather than emotions. Every lie they had told had relied on my passivity. Every signature they had forged had depended on my hesitation. The power they wielded existed only in the space I had left empty. It was time to take it back, quietly, cleanly, without warning. Benjamin offered to draft the legal documents immediately. I told him to wait. I wanted to see how far they would go once they believed their deception was still safe. I wanted them to feel secure, just long enough to reveal everything themselves. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time, not with grief, but with focus. Betrayal had always been my greatest fear. Now it had become my clearest weapon. There was no trembling left, only calculation. I knew what had to come next: the dinner invitation, the calm conversation, the trap disguised as reconciliation. They would come, smiling, certain that they still held control. They would sit across from me and perform the roles they'd perfected for years, and I would let them. Benjamin had asked earlier if I wanted revenge. I said no. Revenge requires anger, and anger still gives them space in your heart. What I wanted was resolution, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that signs papers and ends things permanently. That night, before turning off the lights, I glanced at my reflection in the glass door. The same eyes, the same hands, the same woman, but something in her had shifted. The fire that had once come from pain now burned from clarity. The game they had started was ending, and this time I would decide how it ended. She called me dear. That single word carried the same poison as a smile meant to hide a knife. For years, Vivian had spoken to me in that tone, gentle, pitying, as if my age had softened my mind and dulled my instincts. But this time, something in her voice cracked, just enough for me to hear what lived underneath the velvet. Eleanor, I think we can resolve this without lawyers, she said, as if she were offering me a favor. You've always been such a reasonable woman. I'd hate for your late husband's secrets to ruin that reputation. I said nothing. I let her speak. I wanted to hear how far she would go when she believed she still had leverage. I know about the offshore accounts, she continued, about the shell companies your husband used to move money. It would be terrible if that information became public. The IRS can be very thorough, dear, but we can't avoid that unpleasantness entirely. A simple transaction, $3 million transferred to my account, and the past stays buried. Her words were polished, but her breathing betrayed her. She thought I would panic, that guilt would still hold power over me. She didn't understand that guilt dies once you stop being ashamed. Vivian, I said finally, if you truly believe my husband was hiding something, then by all means bring it into the light. I'm done protecting ghosts. She hesitated, surprised that the script wasn't unfolding the way she expected. Eleanor, you don't want a scandal. You have a son to think of. You have your reputation, your home. Don't make this worse than it needs to be. I think, I said, you've mistaken me for the woman you used to manipulate. That woman died the day you forged my name. Her tone sharpened. You don't know who you're dealing with. Oh, I do, I replied. You're a fraud with a history in 2 states and a daughter who's about to face federal charges. You're running out of time, Vivian, and you're calling the wrong person for mercy. The silence that followed was long enough for me to imagine her hand tightening on the phone. I could almost hear the calculation whirring behind her calm facade, the desperate search for control that had slipped through her fingers. Then came the final attempt. You think you can destroy me, Eleanor? You don't even know what I have. I have documents, letters, proof your husband evaded taxes for 15 years. I can make your family name worthless overnight. If the truth can destroy it, I said evenly, then it was never worth keeping. She exhaled sharply, her composure cracking. 3 million. You have 24 hours. After that, I release everything. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. You'll release nothing, because this call, the one where you threaten extortion and demand money, is being recorded. Detective Naomi Blake is in the next room. For a few seconds there was nothing but the sound of her breathing, shallow and fast. Then the line went dead. Naomi stepped out moments later, professional calm in every movement. She said the recording was clear, the voice unmistakable, the evidence irrefutable. The trace team had already begun triangulating the signal. Within minutes, Vivian's phone would lead them straight to her. I asked if she thought Vivian would run. Naomi shook her head. She'll try, but we're faster. The call had lasted less than 8 minutes, but it had closed years of deceit. The same woman who had whispered comfort into my family's ear had now sealed her own downfall with that gentle, poisonous voice. When Naomi left, I stood still for a long time, the phone screen still glowing faintly in my hand. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one waiting for someone to decide my fate. I had already decided it myself. Vivian had always believed that power came from secrets. She never understood that real power comes from telling the truth, especially when you no longer care who hears it. Tomorrow the headlines would print her name, the courts would record her crimes. The story that began with silence would end with evidence. And somewhere between those 2 points, I had finally stopped being afraid of the dark. Naomi called at dawn, her voice low but certain. Vivian and Clara had withdrawn the remaining funds from a hidden account and fled the country within hours of the blackmail call. They were last seen boarding a private charter flight bound for Mexico City. The authorities had already been notified and Interpol was coordinating the response. Their assets were frozen, the accounts locked, the paper trail closing around them like a tightening net. Benjamin assured me that it was only a matter of time. He said no one could disappear forever with that much evidence chasing them. But his tone softened when he mentioned David. He had spoken to him earlier and said he was unraveling, the kind of collapse that doesn't make a sound but leaves nothing standing. When David arrived, he didn't look like a man who'd been betrayed. He looked like someone who had finally seen himself clearly for the first time. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. She's gone. They're both gone. The house is empty, the accounts are empty, everything's in my name, and all of it's under investigation. I said nothing. He wasn't looking for answers, only for something to hold on to in the middle of what he had built collapsing around him. I thought I was helping her, he said. Helping them? Every time she asked for money, every time Vivian cried about the medical bills, I thought I was doing the right thing. I told myself that good sons take care of family, that good husbands protect their wives. I didn't realize I was protecting lies. He ran his hands through his hair and laughed once, a short, broken sound. Do you know what's worse, Mom? I didn't even like them that much. I just didn't want to be the man who failed his family. I looked at him and saw the boy he used to be, the one who wanted to please everyone, who mistook control for love and approval for safety. It wasn't weakness that had ruined him. It was longing. You didn't destroy me, David, I said quietly. You couldn't. No one can ruin me unless I believe they can. He shook his head, eyes wet, unable to meet mine. I wanted to be better than Dad. I wanted you to be proud of me, and all I did was become the kind of man who would let people hurt you. You became human, I said, and humans are slow learners when it comes to seeing what they don't want to lose. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was necessary. There was no more pretending that things could go back to what they were, no more illusions that love could erase betrayal. When he finally looked at me, his voice was barely above a whisper. What happens now? Now, I said, we stop running from truth. We let justice do its work and we learn how to live with what's left. He nodded, not in agreement, but in surrender. The kind of surrender that comes when you stop fighting the obvious. His shoulders trembled, and for a moment he looked small again, the way children look when they realize the world isn't built to be kind. Then he stepped forward and did something he hadn't done in years. He reached for me. The hug was awkward at first, as if our bodies had forgotten the pattern, but then it deepened, became something else. Not forgiveness, not comfort, but acknowledgement. It wasn't a reunion. It was an understanding. The quiet recognition that both of us had been broken in different ways by the same people. For the first time, we weren't mother and son trying to fix each other. We were two survivors standing on the same ground, each carrying a wound that finally had a name. He whispered, "I'm sorry." And I said nothing because there was nothing left to forgive. In that stillness, something inside both of us shifted, not healed, not mended, but settled. The truth had finally taken up all the space where lies used to live. Naomi's voice echoed later that day when she called back with the update. The suspects were being tracked across state lines, their flight flagged, their aliases compromised. Vivian and Claire were running out of places to hide. Justice, slow as it was, had begun its descent. I told Naomi I wasn't interested in the details. I didn't need to know how or when it would end. It already had. The woman who once sought permission to exist no longer needed anyone's apology or explanation. The silence that used to define my life had turned into something else. Not emptiness, but space. When David left that evening, he looked back once at the doorway, his face older but somehow freer. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to. The past had already been buried. The only thing left was what we'd finally managed to save. Not the money, not the name, but the truth. It ended quietly, not with headlines or courtroom drama, but with a brief phone call from Naomi. Her tone was steady when she said the words I had been waiting for. Vivian Cole and her daughter, Clara Wynn, had been arrested near Tijuana, Mexico. They had been caught trying to cross the border under false names with suitcases full of cash and forged passports. Interpol had confirmed their identities within hours. Naomi said they hadn't resisted, that Vivian looked tired more than afraid. Clara refused to speak, her silence almost rehearsed. Both were being extradited back to the U.S. to face charges of fraud, forgery, and extortion. Naomi sounded relieved when she said it, but I heard something else in her voice. Respect. She said it was rare for cases like mine to come full circle, rarer still for the victim to be the one who forced it to happen. A week later, the newspapers began digging into Robert's old business records. What Vivian had threatened to expose was true after all. The offshore accounts, the unpaid taxes, the shell corporations hidden beneath the image of an honest man. It was all there, printed in black and white for the world to see. Benjamin handled the settlements quietly. The numbers were brutal but clean. $1.8 million transferred to the Department of Treasury in restitution and penalties. It wasn't negotiable, and it wasn't a mistake. It was the debt of a past I hadn't created but had lived inside for decades. When he handed me the final paperwork, he apologized for the loss. I told him it wasn't a loss. It was a cleansing. For the first time in years, everything was honest. The money, the story, the air around me. I said, I spent half my life living in a house built on lies. Now at least it's clean. He looked at me for a long time before saying, most people wouldn't go this far for justice. I smiled and shook my head. I didn't go looking for justice. I just stopped keeping secrets. That became the quiet truth I lived by afterward. Justice, I had learned, isn't about winning. It's about ending. It's what happens when you stop protecting the wrong things. The family's image, the comfortable illusions, the convenient half-truths. David visited once the news broke. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. We sat for a long time without speaking, both of us understanding that we had paid for the truth in different currencies. He with guilt, I with money, both with years we could never get back. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. You were right, he said. Silence costs more than speaking ever could. I nodded. There was nothing left to explain. After that, the days grew simpler. The phone stopped ringing. The questions stopped coming. The noise around my name faded until it was only background hum. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't known I was missing. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on forgetting, but the kind that comes when everything is finally in the open. Naomi called again a few weeks later. She said the trial would take time, that Vivian's lawyers were already negotiating, that Clara had agreed to testify against her mother in exchange for leniency. I told her I didn't care about the outcome. She laughed softly and said, You're the only person I've met who's this calm after everything that's happened. Calm? I asked. No, Naomi, just finished. When the call ended, I sat for a long time thinking about that word. Finished. It didn't mean defeated. It meant complete. I had lost money, yes, but I had gained something far rarer. Clarity. The kind that doesn't shout or demand recognition. The kind that lets you wake up in the morning without feeling the weight of unspoken things pressing against your chest. Sometimes I think about Vivian, about the years she spent weaving her stories, her fragile empire of deceit built on the trust of others. I wonder if, in the final moment of her freedom, she realized what she had truly stolen. It wasn't money. It was belief. And yet, she gave me something without meaning to. The end of illusion. The papers eventually stopped printing our names. The headlines shifted to newer scandals. The world moved on, as it always does. But for me, it didn't end in noise. It ended in silence. A silence that finally belonged to me. Naomi had said few people go that far for justice. She was wrong. Most people want justice. They just don't want to pay what it costs. And I had paid it, down to the last dollar, down to the last illusion. Now, When I look at my life, I see it for what it is. Not perfect, not pure, but true. And truth, I've learned, is the only wealth that doesn't vanish. The sea never changes. The waves still move with the same rhythm they always have, steady, unbothered, eternal. It's only the people who stand before it that shift, carrying new versions of themselves back to shore. A year has passed since everything ended, or maybe it began. I no longer count the days by what was lost, but by what's been planted. The villa has changed, not in structure, but in spirit. Sea Haven no longer feels like a fortress built from pain. It feels like a home that finally learned how to breathe. Every morning I walk through the garden where the lavender grows in wide, patient rows. Their scent lingers longer than memory, soft and grounding. It was David's idea to plant them. He said the garden should smell like forgiveness, and even though we never talk about the past directly, I understand that was his apology. He lives nearby now, close enough to visit, but far enough to find his own rhythm again. Some mornings he comes early to help me with the plants, sleeves rolled up, soil under his fingernails, a quiet redemption that doesn't need words. Other times he cooks, insisting that food is better when shared, and maybe that's true. Maybe that's how family begins again, not through forgiveness, but through repetition. The house is rarely empty. Once a week, I hold classes in the sunroom for women over 50. They come with notebooks, questions, and that familiar look of uncertainty that I once wore. They ask how to manage money, how to protect themselves, how to start over when everything feels too late. I tell them what no one ever told me, that control is not the same as safety, and silence is not the same as peace. We talk about banks, inheritance, contracts, but underneath it all, we talk about dignity, about reclaiming the right to decide, to own, to walk away. And when they leave, I see the same flicker of light in their faces that once returned to mine, fragile at first, but real. Benjamin visits every weekend. He always brings coffee and the quiet steadiness of someone who's learned to exist beside my silence without trying to fix it. He gives me updates about the case, though the case no longer feels like mine. Vivian and Clara were sentenced months ago. Their names appear in newspapers now only as footnotes, brief reminders of a story that no longer has power over me. We don't talk about justice anymore. We talk about small things, the weather, the books we've read, the way lavender reacts differently to salt in the air. Sometimes we fall into silence that isn't awkward but full. I've come to value that kind of silence. It doesn't take. It gives. One afternoon, while we were reviewing some paperwork for the Women's Fund, there was a pause. Not long, not dramatic, just the kind that happens when the words stop but the meaning continues. He looked up and I did too. For a moment there was nothing to hide behind. It wasn't love, not yet. It was recognition. The quiet knowing between two people who had both spent years standing in the wreckage of other people's choices and somehow decided to stay open anyway. It felt like a beginning disguised as stillness. After he left, I sat by the window, the same one I once watched storms through. The light had shifted softer now, less accusing. I realized I hadn't thought about loss in months. Not because it had vanished, but because it had finally taken its place. Behind me, not beside me. The sea outside moved the way it always had. Endless, unconcerned. But I wasn't the same woman who had once stood there waiting for something to save her. Naomi called last week to tell me she was retiring. She said I'd changed how she looked at her work, that I'd reminded her justice could be quiet and still count. I told her she'd reminded me that courage doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it walks in as paperwork, steady hands, and persistence. When I hung up, I realized something simple but profound. Endings aren't real. There are only moments when we decide that what's come before is finally enough. I have enough now. Enough truth to live with, enough peace to stop chasing, enough strength to build something without waiting for anyone's permission. Tomorrow, more women will come to Sea Haven. They'll sit where I once sat, frightened, uncertain, ready to begin again. I'll tell them what I know, not as advice, but as a map. You will lose things you thought you needed. You will find things you never expected. You will learn that silence can destroy you or save you. It depends on whether you let it speak. And when the lesson ends, I'll walk them to the garden, where lavender bends with the wind but never breaks. The sea will still move, the air will still smell like forgiveness, and I will still be here, not waiting, not remembering, just living. The room was full that afternoon. The women had come early, notebooks open, pens ready, the quiet hum of expectation filling the air. It was our last class of the season. The final session before summer, before they each returned to their separate lives carrying whatever pieces of courage they had gathered here. We had talked about money, about contracts, about the simple arithmetic of independence. But today wasn't about numbers. Today was about the kind of balance that doesn't fit on paper, the one between remembering and letting go. One of the younger women, her voice trembling just enough to betray the question's weight, raised her hand. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "do you ever regret not forgiving your daughter-in-law?" The room went still. Every head turned slightly, waiting for something softer than the truth. I took a breath before answering. "Forgiveness," I said slowly, "isn't about inviting someone back into your life. It's about letting them leave your mind." She blinked, not quite understanding yet. "When you forgive without wisdom," I continued, "you build the same cage again, just with cleaner walls. Forgiveness isn't meant to erase what happened. It's meant to remind you that it no longer controls you. I didn't refuse to forgive her. I simply refused to carry her anymore." The silence that followed was deep and almost holy. You could feel everyone measuring their own ghosts against that sentence. Another woman whispered, "That must have been hard." "It was," I said, "but living with resentment is harder. Resentment is a tenant that never pays rent. Forgiveness is eviction." Someone laughed softly, not at me, but with me. The kind of laughter that comes from sudden relief. When the session ended, the women stayed longer than usual. They lingered, touching my hand, thanking me, promising to return. I believed them. They weren't students anymore. They were witnesses. They had seen a woman rebuild her life not from the ruins, but from the refusal to stop standing. After they left, the house was quiet again. David was in the kitchen finishing the cake he had baked that morning, his first attempt uneven but proud. He still asked before using my oven, a habit left from childhood that I never corrected. When he brought the cake to the table, he looked shy, almost uncertain. "You know what day it is?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes, it's the day I stopped counting." There was one candle in the center, plain and small. I hadn't lit one in years. I used to think birthdays were a measurement of disappointment, another reminder that the people you loved could forget you without meaning to. But this time, the room wasn't empty. I struck the match and watched the flame catch. The light wavered, reflected in David's eyes. He said, "You should make a wish." "I already did," I said, "and it came true." He hesitated before blowing out the candle. With me, our breath meeting in the middle, a quiet reconciliation without speeches or apologies. For the first time in 5 years, the flame didn't mark an ending. It marked a continuation. The candle had been dark for too long, its wax hardened from neglect. Now it burned bright, brief, alive, and when it went out, the smoke didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. I thought of all the years I'd spent waiting for that moment, waiting to be seen, understood, forgiven. But what I learned was simpler. You don't wait for light. You make it. Outside, the sound of laughter drifted from the garden where the lavender was still in bloom. It smelled of calm, not sorrow. The sea hadn't changed, but the woman who looked at it no longer saw reflection. She saw direction. I turned to David and said, "Next year, we'll need more candles." He smiled, a little uncertain, but the kind of uncertain that carries hope. And for the first time, I realized the lesson wasn't mine to teach anymore. It belonged to whoever was still learning how to begin again. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you finally stop explaining yourself. It doesn't arrive with triumph or applause. It arrives quietly, like the sound of the tide returning after years of retreat. All my life I asked for permission. Permission to speak, permission to feel, permission to exist in a way that didn't make anyone uncomfortable. I learned to shrink politely, to apologize before I'd even done anything wrong, to confuse being kind with being silent. They called it being a good woman. I called it survival. But something happens when the world forgets your birthday 5 years in a row. You realize you've been waiting for recognition from people who only remember you when they need your patience. You realize you've built your life around their comfort, not your own. It took me 64 years to understand that obedience isn't love. It's erasure. That day, when they left for their trip and I watched their car disappear down the hill, I thought I was being abandoned. I wasn't. I was being returned to myself. They called it reckless when I bought the villa. They said I was losing my mind, acting out, ruining my family's image. But I wasn't losing anything. I was reclaiming everything. I wasn't trying to prove I could live without them. I was proving I had already been doing it. Every decision I made after that wasn't revenge. It was resurrection. The kind that doesn't need permission, doesn't need witnesses, doesn't need forgiveness. It only needs truth. Truth is quiet. Truth is inconvenient. Truth is freedom in its purest form. I remember the first morning after moving here. Sea Haven, that's what I named it. The wind was sharp, and my reflection in the window looked like someone I almost recognized. It wasn't youth I saw returning. It was ownership, of breath, of choice, of self. People like Vivian will always call women like me reckless. That's the word they use when we stop being useful. But they forget that what they call chaos is often the sound of women rebuilding their lives. They took money. They took years. They took the version of me that thought survival meant staying quiet. But they didn't take my ending. That part I kept for myself. Now, when I stand before the sea, I don't see reflection anymore. I see direction. I see proof that the tide comes back no matter how far it's been pulled away. The villa behind me isn't a monument to wealth or revenge. It's a home built from something rarer, the decision to stop asking for permission. Sometimes David visits. We sit by the shore, the lavender swaying in the breeze, and he says it still amazes him how different everything feels now. I tell him it's not different. It's honest. That's all. Honesty changes everything. Even the air feels lighter when you stop lying to yourself. The world didn't collapse when I stopped apologizing. It didn't even notice. But I did. For the first time, the silence around me wasn't heavy. It was mine. They called it reckless. I call it reclaiming my life.